Hi guys, welcome to the Beer Temple. I am Chris Quinn. You can already tell that things are a little bit different on this episode. Actually, this is just an introduction to what I'm about to put on the screen for you guys. From time to time here in the store, we have events. Often they are ticketed, a little bit intimate, and we like to kind of do deep dives on specific beers or styles or brewers. And one of the things that I don't really like about these events is that by nature, because they are intimate, I can't include as many people as I wanted. So at the last event, we decided to put a camera up and record the whole thing, and I'm gonna throw it online and you guys can hopefully partake in you know, what happens at these small events that we put on from time to time. This particular event was with Pipeworks Brewing in Chicago, Illinois. They are a really fascinating nano brewer, if you will. They were recently named the RateBeer.com #1 new brewery in the world, and they've got a fascinating story. So I hope you guys will find it as interesting as I did, and the people in the audience did as well. If this is something that you guys like, let me know, and I will continue to put these sort of things online as they kind of come up in the store. Without further ado, I will say I'm going to chop it up into a couple pieces to make it a little bit more palatable for you guys. This event did go about 2 hours, hour and a half, something like that. So I'll break it up into a couple chunks. But other than that, I'll let the video speak for itself. So here you guys go. Pipeworks Brewing Company here at the Beer Temple. Guys, thanks so much for coming. I'm Chris Quinn. I own the Beer Temple. I have been operating this place since January of this year. Since before that, I had a video blog, or have a video blog I've been doing for a couple of years. I don't know if any of you guys have noticed me from that or where you have, but in any regards, thank you guys for coming out. I'm pretty excited to be doing this, and especially to be doing this with the people sitting to my left. Basically, I've got the two founders of Pipeworks Brewing here, BJ Olson and Garrett Lewis. Oslin. Yeah. Oslin, there you go. So you guys opened in January 2012. They met while working at West Lakeview Liquors, which is a really awesome bottle shop here in Chicago. I'd say one of the flagship bottle stores and one of really kind of the stalwart bottle shops holding it down in the dark ages for craft beer. Or at least BJ was, you guys kind of got the homebrew bug. They went and they did an internship at Destroysa in Belgium. Came back and started Pipeworks Brewing here last year, and probably started in 2011. Some pretty innovative techniques for funding their brewing, and they were last year named by RateBeer.com the #1 new brewery in the world for 2012. So I know they're kind of local stars, but these guys do have some international press as well. So I'm very, very excited to talk about that. In addition to kind of the accolades, they're also very unconventional in, I'd say, their concepts overall, whether it is how they started, how they funded their brewery, the just sheer volume and prolific nature of their brewing, I think is very much integral to what these guys are, and I just kind of want to dive into that. I apologize in advance. I am going to be referring to some of these questions that I have, because there's a lot of stuff I think that you guys would be very interested to know about these guys that you may or may not know about already. But like I said, if I missed anything at the end, feel free to raise your hand. And basically what we're going to do is my idea is to take the history of Pipeworks from, when they were people just like you and I who were interested in beer, through home brewing, through starting up Pipeworks, and the trials and tribulations of starting up your own tiny little brewery in a cutthroat market like Chicago. So it should be really fun. I think they have a great story. So that said, let's begin. Thanks guys for coming. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers guys.
Yeah.
And cheers to all of you, my friends.
Yeah. All right, so basically I wanted to start from the beginning, and I wanted to ask each of you what Pipeworks means to you. I know that's a very, yeah. So what is Pipeworks to you guys? I'll ask each of you, but why not start with, well, start with you, BJ. Aslan.
Thank you, sir. Pipeworks to me is, I mean, it's the culmination of, I mean, every home brewer's dream, and I mean, everybody's dream. I mean, the American dream to start your own business. Home brewing to me, the bug bit me when I was in art school. My roommate at the time was a chef, and one day he was like, hey, let's brew some beer. And I was like, what? You can make beer at home? And up until that point, I was drinking Heineken, thinking that was the cool beer. Like, I was like, this is good, you know, it's from Europe. And then we bought some crappy like Creek kit. It was literally a can of cherry syrup that we added like bread yeast to in a bucket. And that was my first brewing experience. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. We made beer. And then after that, we started really playing. And like once I started all grain brewing, I really like just like started. I went on Rate Beer and I saw how many styles of beer there were. And I was just like, my nerd nature was just like, just jumped into it. And so, I mean, to make a long story short, Pipeworks for me is, you know, the culmination of a dream of a craft beer lover to be able to bring to the market the things that I found when I first started drinking beer and like fell in love with, and to be able to continue that journey and continue the innovation that we see all the time in this awesome industry.
Cool. Garrett, how about you?
To expound upon what BJ was saying, I got into it more from the Rate Beer side as well. You know, went to Binny's in college before I was of age, and I didn't realize there would be beers that were, you know, $10 a bottle, you know, from Belgium. And then on the American side of the Binny's aisle, you know, you had the Three Floyds stuff and the Founder stuff. And just, you never see that in a supermarket or at your, you know, corner bodega, so you never really knew that stuff existed. So I slowly kind of got into that way, and then we kind of converged at a similar point. And I think what Pipeworks is, at least for brewing for us, is the ability to explore all those unique things you can do with beer, and then put them in a package and then also sell them. Because, you know, you have a lot of great breweries that maybe focus on one or two things that they do really well. Doesn't mean they don't love or want to make all those other styles, but they don't get the opportunity to, because they have to put them in 6-packs and they have to sell, you know, 100,000 barrels worth of this one brand. Well, we don't have to do that. Every week we get to come up with a different brand, whatever we kind of want to do, and kind of continue to refine that, because we're not buying 100,000 labels of any one SKU at a time.
So keeping, well, the beer in front of us then, I guess. Could you talk a little bit about the beer that people have in their glass or had in their glass when they first came in, and how that fits into the philosophy you guys were just talking about?
This is a really great example. This is a beer that BJ and I came up with in 2010 for Stout Fest. Jared Rubin was one of our, you know, first Chicago beer buddies, and he invited us out to Stout Fest, and we're like, you know, we're not a real brewery yet. And he's like, don't worry about it, you know. And this was about a week before the event, or no, it was like two or 3 weeks before the event. So it was less than a month. So we didn't have a lot of time to. This was actually the second Stout Fest. So sorry, this is 2011.
Right, because they did it.
The first Stout Fest was a week before the event. This one we had a little more time to prepare for it. So we did the beer called End of Days. But we didn't want to just bring one beer to the event, so we split that batch into 2 beers. One was End of Days, and the other later became called Jones Dog. So it was the same base recipe, without the cinnamon, without the ancho chili. I think those are the only 2.
And then this is coffee. So.
And then so that became Jones Dog, End of Days.
Right.
And then Jones Dog was one of the first, or End of Days is one of the first beers we brewed. Jones Dog was right after that at the production facility. And then we added coffee, so now this one beer became 3 beers.
Right. And is that how you would say it kind of fits into the Pipeworks philosophy, is taking one beer and then
this isn't even the same Hyperdog. Now this is Imperial Hyperdog. Right. And now Imperial End of Days is coming out. So it's, you know, the beer is kind of always evolving into something different, and they can both exist. You know, this and regular Hyperdog can both exist, as can End of Days.
And to your question, I think that is a big part of our philosophy, is like, you know, taking a base recipe and then kind of expounding upon that idea and exploring what else. Like our Abduction series is really popular. You know, we have this base Imperial Stout, and then we like to explore it with different fruit additions. You'll see that further as we go. We'll even go beyond the fruit with that. So like Jones Dog is like our milk stout base, which will then, you know, go explore different flavors that we think might go with a milk stout. So we kind of approach a beer like this with that kind of culinary attitude of like, all right, well, it's like chocolate milk, what can go on that? So End of Days became, you know, kind of the Mexican hot chocolate, South American version. And then of course, like, you know, this is like more of a mocha version. So yeah.
Cool. So basically, it sounds like I want to kind of, like I said, talk from the beginning of your guys' history. You started out as beer drinkers, and then you kind of graduated. I don't know if graduated is the right word, but more like converted into homebrewing. And I wanted to get an idea of some of the beers that kind of captured your imagination, or I don't know if you had an aha moment. I kind of didn't have an aha moment. It was kind of a gradual thing, but there were kind of milestone beers. And when I was talking to you guys about beers that had an early impact on you, one of the ones that you mentioned was the Alesmith Wee Heavy.
Right.
I just wanted to know why that beer in particular was important to you guys, and there it is there, and also how did it have an effect on Pipeworks, and also for you guys, if you don't love this beer, fake it, because I spent all day getting this beer. This was a royal pain in the ass to get this beer, but yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there are beers outside of the beers you guys brew that are important to you and that kind of play a role, if maybe behind the scenes, in what you guys are. You brought this up to me.
Right.
Why is this beer important to you?
Well, I mean, if you reference, you know, AHA beers, that's what definitely worked for BJ just right from the start. Is we were definitely in synergy for all the beers that we thought were the greatest beers in the world.
Right.
And right off the bat, it made it real easy to figure out where we wanted to focus our brewery, because we were definitely in agreement on that.
Yeah, I mean, like me, the great thing about working with Garrett every day is, you know, like we share a very common palate. Like we like the same beers 9 times out of 10, if not more than that. And so like a beer like Alesmith's Wee Heavy, you know, like we had a couple of Wee Heavies. I mean, Garrett had probably had 50 at this point. Garrett, when we first got together, I had probably brewed more beers than I had like tried on the market, to be honest. And while Garrett had already accumulated like over 1,000 rates on rate beer at this point. So I mean, like he was kind of a lexicon of beer knowledge. So like he would always come to me and be like, "Oh, BJ, I love your double IPA. Try this one. Try this one. Try this one."
I do a little bit like Chris does it. Like I bring BJ 5 double IPA or 5
Right.
heavies and go, "Let's talk about all 5."
Yeah, exactly.
So we have,
he, like,
we have
brackets me.
a frame of reference. So you know, kind of how.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry. Go on.
So a beer like Alesmith Wee Heavy, I remember like distinctly like trying that beer and just like the depth of flavor, like the amount. The layering of flavor in that Wee Heavy, it's just such a large, like beautiful, like rich body. There's like the tones of vanilla and like caramel and kind of maple that all come together. And so I think when me and Garrett tried this beer, it was like when we talked about brewing a Wee Heavy, we were like, well, our base is Alesmith.
Well, this
Wee
is
Heavy.
also one of the first Wee Heavies I ever had, so it definitely kind of set a precedent.
Sure.
And something we know is that a lot of American brewers, they try to fake the Wee Heavy, or it's kind of a made-up style, to be honest, by adding smoked malt, because they assume it's got to taste peaty. The Wee Heavies aren't
If it's got
supposed to.
Scotch ale, it needs to taste like Scotch.
It's actually a derivative from the fermentation.
Right.
And this beer does it pretty beautifully.
So did this beer then, was this one that you kind of brought to BJ and said, hey, BJ?
No, he's already actually had it before we had started getting together and drinking and going over beer stuff in 2008. And because it might, I don't know if it was available in Indiana at the time, but I know, is Alesmith available in Indiana now?
I don't know, it is in Wisconsin. They just came to Wisconsin.
But they weren't always. They were about a 1,000-barrel-a-year brewery when we had met in 2008, and I think they're doing, I think they're like 8 or 13,000 barrels now. So they're definitely a little more widespread. But this is one I had tried before, and BJ had also tried.
And what kind of beers would people maybe be able to see? What beers of yours would people be able to see this beer's influence on? So when they're tasting this beer now, you know, in the future, what beers could maybe they be thinking of, or you know?
As far as what we brew?
Yeah, what you guys brew.
Last Kiss Wee Heavy is a direct result of our experience with this beer. While it's not brewed at all in the same way as this beer, Last Kiss was kind of our homage to this, or like, you know, like our jumping point from this beer. It's, you know, our beer uses some adjuncts, which I don't believe theirs uses at all. So, you know, in our case, we were really trying to like amp up that maple character, something that we had picked out in the notes of this. It's not brewed with any sort of maple, but it's something we wanted.
Right, like a brown sugar mapley thing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think this is maybe the second or third, or within the first 10 beers that we homebrewed, and we had talked about it, and then BJ had come up with a recipe after us, kind of discussing the things we wanted. And this is when I was starting to learn how to homebrew from BJ, and so BJ tells me the schedule of the brew day, and he put in a 4-hour boil on this guy, which we can't do at the moment in a professional setting. So that made for a very interesting brew day where we had about 4 hours of the day. We were just playing board games or something, waiting for the beer to boil. We never did it again like that.
I remember getting to the cleanup section of that day and being pretty half in the bag.
It was pitch black. It was right around this time in the fall, so the sun's starting to set real early, and we've been out there since the break of dawn. We're trying to clean up, and it's about this time, and it was just pitch black in the backyard.
And could you just very briefly talk about what a wee heavy is? I mean, just quite literally. I mean, it's a beer.
Feel that way.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just an English beer basically, but it's could be brewed in Scotland, so it's brewed of English yeast, but they've kind of isolated some of the more famous wee heavies, the yeast, which will give a little different ester profile. That kind of gives off that smokiness.
Right.
So definitely something you kind of want to ferment. It's an ale yeast, but you do ferment it at a little bit of a lower temperature.
And then that kind of brings down the fruity characters and pushes forward the malt, so it's kind of a malt-driven beer. And
very malt-driven, and also like that yeast at that temperature range releases some phenols, which kind of emulate that smokiness. It gives you that little bit of it's not quite astringent, but it kind of it plays that way on the tongue, I think.
Got it. And are there any other beers other than the one that we've tasted that kind of had a major impact in just your overall philosophy, or got you guys interested in homebrewing? Like, why did you decide to homebrew, or why did you decide to homebrew? It seems like you kind of went into it, but
yeah, I actually went in completely the opposite way of most people. Most people get into craft beer and then start homebrewing because they want to emulate this craft beer. I, by happenstance, started homebrewing, and that sparked my interest in craft beer because it's a really weird thing.
Yeah, that's totally counter.
I mean, I had been to Belgium before, and I had some great beers out there, but it wasn't stuff that I knew how to get in Chicago necessarily. So yeah, it was just really weird. I had, like I said, my roommate was like, "Hey, let's homebrew beer," and then my nerdy nature, I just started digging. And I was just like, every book I could get, I was just like, "Oh, IPA, what's that? What's that? Oh, hops. Oh my God, what's a hop? There's 10,000 kinds of hops."
So were you brewing styles you had never had a commercial example of?
Yeah, initially for sure.
Wow.
I mean, I brewed some IPAs before I'd ever had an IPA, and there was one of my aha moments. We went to Whole Foods, which at the time I had never been to a Whole Foods. I was like probably 22 or something, and I lived under a rock. But we got some Alpha King, and that was my first IPA. I mean, pale ale,
right.
IPA, obviously.
Yeah.
And I remember drinking that beer and just looking at my roommate with this look of wonder, being like, "That's what hops taste like." And then after that, it was over. I mean, by the end of that, within that month, we had built an all-grain system. I had 6 carboys in the basement. It was insanity. The bug bit me hard.
Bug bit you hard, and you? Same thing, a little different?
Well, I had the kind of the opposite is where, I had so many great commercial examples of all this stuff, but I didn't understand them because of not being a brewer at that time. I didn't, and then I tasted some of BJ's homebrew, and he's a very technical-minded guy. I'm a technical-minded guy. And I'm going, "Oh, BJ, we can totally make this." And BJ's like, "Well, that's probably one of the hardest things in the world to do." I'm like, "Oh, we can totally do it." So I definitely kind of pushed BJ, and then BJ, without me knowing, is coming up with all this crazy stuff. And then we, got together, and after about 60 or 100 batches, I learned a lot from BJ, and then we were kind of able to come up with stuff together.
So where do the crazy recipes, the out there stuff that you guys brew, who does that come from? Is it one of you or both of you? Or
it's all everybody.
And like I said, this is one of the second or third beers we ever brewed, and this was a lot of stuff that we talked about what we wanted, and then BJ's like, "Oh, I have this recipe, we're doing it," and then we do it, and it was really cool. So I've learned how to kind of think outside the box from BJ throwing some of those ideas out there to begin with.
But in general, you guys came from maybe a more traditional road of, I like these beers, I want to make these beers for myself, and then I want to make these beers for other people.
Right. And then after having so many beers, you go, "Okay, I like this one, but it could be better this way." So then you start thinking about, all right, how do we make that beer, and then we can make it one step, better.
Interesting.
Garrett also has a tendency of having a glass of let's say our beer. He'll be like, "Oh, we have our golden ale in a glass," and he's like, "What happens if I pour some pineapple juice in it?" Just right in the glass, and he's like, hey BJ, that's pretty good. We should make that. And it's like, okay, now we're gonna figure out how to make pineapple beer.
blend.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like,
Well,
damn.
I guess at first I thought maybe that might be sacrilege, but while BJ was out in Belgium, I was a little late to join him. He was there for a few weeks before I was there. He was living on the farm, the Ostrich Farm, which is the Streusa. And they had blended Black Albert with De Moulins Hell and Damnation.
Helen Verduminous, yeah. Helen
Verduminous. And that's how the beer Black Damnation came about, which is one of Urban's new series. I think he had like 8 in the series or something.
Yeah.
So BJ,
We actually made that
BJ
beer.
actually kind of
Awesome.
stumbled
I never
upon
knew
it,
that.
and I thought it was like sacrilege. You can't blend beers together like that. So then BJ helped do the label for that one as well. And then ever since BJ did that and I was kind of successful, I've just been blending everything.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to talk about the Streusa in a moment because I want to see where that kind of fits into it. And I think it's a really awesome part of your guys' history that probably a lot of people don't realize. So I also, when kind of coming up with this idea, wanted to see if there were any homebrew beers that people could actually taste. And Garrett, you seem to think that Pastrami on Rye was a really good example of a beer you guys homebrewed and made into a production beer pretty much unchanged.
Right.
Yeah, it's
more or less.
identical. I'm pretty sure it's scaled up directly from the old notes.
All the
Okay.
spices and everything.
So we'll be then tasting, or you guys will shortly be tasting
Are we drinking
Pastrami
this
on
one, or
Rye.
is this just teasing us?
It's been open.
I thought so.
We're both drinking. All right, fine. In fact, I'm drinking Pastrami on Rye. So as you drink Alesmith Wheat Heavy, tell me about Pastrami on Rye. Feel free to pour yourself some. I'll take this away. And
This is one we made right after Last Kiss, so it definitely falls into that first kind of 10 recipes we had. And it was another one where this crazy week of brewing with BJ, where he's just like, we're going to do all these crazy things. And this is my
this one was
this is my
weird.
intro to homebrewing, so I just thought it was normal. This is how you brew.
Well, this
all
one
this
was
crazy
weird
stuff.
because, like, all right, so this started as a joke. One day we were at Three Floyd's Brew Pub and we were drinking ham on rye over there, which is like a smoked kind of.
It's a Helles,
smoked
like a
Helles.
German. Yeah.
And we were like, oh, that's funny. And me and Garrett are both Jewish or come from Jewish heritage. And so, you know, pastrami on rye is, you know, like the big Jewish thing. You go to the corner deli and you get pastrami. We don't have too many Jewish delis anymore, but. And so we always joked about it. We're like, you know, we're both into a lot of culinary things. I had a charcuterie book at my house, and we're looking through it. And I'm like, oh man, we could just use all the brining spices of pastrami in there. And we're looking at the spices. It's like bay leaves, chili flakes, you know, clove, not cardamom. That comes later. And we're looking at all these
Mustard
things. Mustard seed, and then we put the caraway seed, and like. It was all a joke to me. Like, I kind of penned the recipe with Garrett, and it was like, we're never going to make this. It's a joke.
Well, also, we're sitting there kind of scrutinizing the recipe and trying to, you know, a little more of this, a little less of this, and we're just going, what are we doing? We don't even know what it's going to taste like anyway, so just throw it all in there.
Yeah, and I remember, like, there was just, like, a blank spot on the, like, we had a really firm brew schedule once we were like, we're going to make a brewery. So, like, every week it was like...
Homebrew schedule.
A homebrew schedule, yeah. I mean, like, we had to brew at least twice a week, like, every week. I mean, this is when we knew Pipeworks was going to happen.
Did this exist before you knew Pipeworks was going to happen?
This came out about the time we were doing the Kickstarter project.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we
So this
were
and Last
already
Kiss.
full steam ahead.
Okay.
From the couch.
Okay.
So when he says 10 batches in, he's not saying 10 batches of our home brews together, but 10 batches of our Pipeworks home brews.
Okay, got it.
Right, yeah, right.
Yeah, so so this beer was a joke, and then when it fermented, we were both laughing because we're throwing all these spices. I mean, the sock of spices that went into the kettle was like a freaking softball, and I mean a Chicago softball, not one of those little hard things. And we're just sitting there steeping this thing, and I'm looking at Garrett, I'm like, I don't know, dude,
not
this is
gonna have any
fucking
beer left.
weird.
Yeah.
So you're thinking this thing's crazy, but I want to make this for a production.
Well, I mean, no. It wasn't. I wouldn't have said that right from the
Okay,
beginning.
okay,
It was
okay.
like it was a big experiment. And then once it had fermented out and we tasted it, we looked at each other. We're like, dude, it's a Christmas ale, man.
Yeah.
It's freaking perfect. Like it's totally balanced.
It reminds us a little bit of a bigger version of Anchor, our special ale, which is one of my favorite beers. And so we end up making a lot of my favorite beers by accident.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we get to take a different path, but we end up almost at the same point.
the luxury of brewing.
And
so
our
many different
Christmas
beers.
ale, I think, is a beer that's like 5.5% alcohol, something around. I think it's around there.
Wait, so this is not your Christmas beer?
No, I mean our special ale from Anchor. Brewing.
Okay. Oh, got it.
So,
Okay.
and that's why this kind of brings a little bit different, something different to the table, because it's about 9.5% alcohol, a lot more residual sugar, different kinds of spices, you know, a little more smoky. I think what we want to do with
Smoky,
this
and
one,
you get that like mustardy, pastrami. Like, it's not meaty, but it's got all the same spices, so it does make you think of like what you're smelling when you're like right about to take a bite into it. You don't quite taste the meat yet, you just smell all those spices. Is very much what you.
And I mean, it's a combination, you know, it's like the use of the smoked malt, you know, like we use a lot of dark sugar, some honey, like there's a lot of different layers that go into this beer that, I mean, literally it was like a lucky guess. Like we scrutinized this recipe over and over before we brewed it, but like, there's like 13 spices in this thing. Like we had no idea how. And
11 herbs and spices.
I was like, putting bay leaves in a beer.
Yeah, it's the Kentucky Fried Chicken secret recipe of beer.
It certainly is.
Are there any other homebrew beers that made it to pretty much untouched to your commercial brews, and were any of those also just mistakes?
Last Kiss was pretty close.
Or lucky guesses?
Like we said, the Jones Dog, the Hyper Dog, and the End of Days, we made a lot of changes to those beers over the time, but those, Abduction, we've made a lot of changes to that one as well. But
I think the philosophy of our double IPAs has stayed pretty consistent. Right. While there's a little hemming and hawing over different ingredients for the different variants on our double IPAs, like the theory behind our double IPA is pretty firm from our homebrew days.
Well, that was one of the last things we ever tested on the homebrew systems. That was actually the first beer I had from BJ. It was a different kind of, I think it was Crystal in that first one I had.
Yeah, probably a little bit.
Double IPA. And then we never brewed another double IPA homebrew-wise for, I think, 2 years. And then we did the one for the map room, which was...
I remember that. You guys got in trouble for that one, didn't you?
No.
Oh.
No, this was before we got in trouble for it.
Yeah, we actually got one on.
So then from homebrewing, and we were talking about some of the beers that made it. I'm sure there were other ones that you guys were just experimenting with that didn't make it. You said that you were pretty much, by the time you came up with this in Last Kiss, already full bore, decided that you wanted to open up Pipeworks. How did you guys decide, I'm homebrewing, I'm into homebrewing, I want to take this in another direction. It's not enough just to be homebrewing. I want to start doing a commercial. Like, tell people the story behind that process.
It started that way. So BJ, I started working in at West Lakeview in probably February of 2008, and then Dark Lord Days last Saturday in April. And so BJ had started working at West Lakeview, I think, just earlier that month.
Yeah.
Maybe March.
Yeah, and I had started there in the specific reason to get into the beer industry. Like, I was like, I couldn't get a job at a brewery. We had no breweries, and so.
And when you say industry, you mean brewing?
No, not in the liquor industry. I was specifically looking to get into brewing, but it was the only option.
And that's kind of another reason why I took the job as well. I had another job at the time, and I was just like, oh, this is a really cool store. Like this one is. It's like, I can learn about all these beers that I didn't know anything about. But you know, waiting in line at Dark Lord Day with 8,000 other people for 8 hours gives you a lot of time to kind of talk and drink and, you know, come to, you know, a meeting of the minds. So by the time, I just don't remember what happened the rest of Dark Lord Day, but we're on our way back and we're just talking over each other in the car, and we get to work the next following week. We're like, we're still gonna do this, right? Like,
that wasn't 100% just dry talk, right? Only 80%, yeah. So that was it then. You just were at Dark Lord Day in line, drinking and waiting and saying, I want to do this, I want to do it too, let's do it together.
Yeah, I mean, looking around, that atmosphere was so, like, you know, it was electric, you know. I mean, it was like, oh my God, this is so amazing to see all these people enjoying this thing, and like how real it had become. Craft beer wasn't just like a shot in the dark, it was like, wow.
And mind you, in 2008, Gabriel and Matt at Half Acre, they weren't even contracting yet. I mean, they just started contracting a little bit later that year in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You know, Doug and Tracy were just, you know, getting their stuff together for Metro.
Yeah.
And then I remember being in line, and the people in front of us in line had brought up beer from, I believe, Mississippi. Good People Brewing. Is that Mississippi or is that Alabama?
I don't know.
Because I know a lot of the southern states have changed. They had laws against homebrewing and laws against having breweries, really. So I remember those guys were right in line in front of us, and so at the time it was really cool that there wasn't. It was just kind of the beginnings of the second craft beer, you know, revolution. The first
third wave.
Yeah.
So then, how does Destroys fit into it? Was that kind of your internship, or I want to be a brewer? I don't know how much people know about that whole part of your life, but I'll summarize it and then ask you guys to expound. Sure. So Destroysa is a Belgian brewery. I would say very much kind of an avant-garde brewery. One question, are we serving Ninja Unicorn out of bottles, not out of keg? Yes. Okay, that's fine. Luckily I have it. And you guys owe me $100. Anyway.
I don't think they ever got a
No,
wrench.